The other day, I finished creating my set of 3 pinch pots. I have one that has drawing and or textures. I turned another pinch pot into this little face, and then my other one has a foot at the bottom to raise it up off the table. But hopefully you added a little bit more time and effort into my demonstration pieces. What I want to talk to you about today is how you can finish those pieces once they are bone dry. If you notice, my clay color has changed. It's no longer the dark gray color it was when it was wet or leather hard, but now it's sort of a very light gray, almost whitish color. This is telling me that the clay no longer has moisture in it that's visible. So chemically, there's still water in this piece of pottery, but visually, I can't see any of the moisture left into it. So that means that these pots are very fragile. If I'm not careful with them, I can break them easily, and repairing them is next to impossible. So you have to do these next final steps extremely careful. And for some of you, maybe leaving them as they are is the best option. But this is sort of that finishing step. So what I have with me is my Sgraffito tool. That's the one that has the hook and a speared end. Now, some of your hooks are really curved and some are not so much. So just use it the best you can depending upon which one you have in your toolkit. I also have a sponge. I brought with me a little bowl of water to make it easier. So if you're working at home, you might be able to use a dish or a bowl of water. If you're in the studio, you're welcome to get up and to rinse your sponge or to get your sponge wet at the sink area as you need to. And then the other tool that I brought with me, you do not have in your toolkit. It's just this little green square of a Scotch-Brite pad, so you can kind of see the words on the back of it. It comes in a sheet, something like this. You might use it for cleaning dishes or maybe cleaning in your kitchen, but you can see on the back that it says Scotch-Brite. And you can get this at any grocery store. You can get this at the Dollar General, Walmart, just about any possible place that you would find like dishwashing materials. Um, I don't have a lot of it, but if you're in the studio, you'll have access to it. So I apologize to my online only students who may have to figure out another option. Another option might be some very smooth sandpaper, so not a very heavy grit, but a little bit smoother. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to work on my shallow pot, and that's just because I was talking about how when I dug into with this tool, it made these lines. Well, now if I'm gentle, I can scrape some of those lines out a little bit. Now it's creating some clay dust. I don't want to blow onto the clay. That would cause it to go into the air, and depending upon where you're working at home or in the studio, you don't want that to get into what you would be breathing. So I'm going to gently flip that upside down, and so now I've kind of removed that rough edge. And then if I want to, I can come back in with this tool. But I need to be incredibly careful right now because at any point I could crack and break my piece. And then as I look at it, maybe there's just a couple other little spots that I want to get the roughness away from. The dry clay crumbs that I'm kind of scraping off, if you're working at home, it might be nice to have a piece of newspaper down. That way it's kind of collecting those clay crumbs for you, and you don't have to worry about getting that clay dust into other areas of your home, your room, or wherever you've made your little studio space for ceramics. If you're in the classroom, it also doesn't hurt to put a little bit of newspaper down. But if you forget, we can use our table scrapers at the end of class and gently and slowly scrape that clay away. We don't want to create clouds of dust, and that can happen if you use your table scraper and scrape extremely hard or vigorously, so to speak. So now I've removed the little rough edges that were in my outside texture, and I'm just going to do a little bit of the same thing on my inside. And if I didn't do a fabulous job of smoothing, I can come back to that here in a second and show you. So if I use, like, I don't like how that looks, so I just want to, but I have to be so careful because if I break something off, it's pretty hard to repair, if impossible to repair, once something is bone dry. And that's why with the Pinch Pot project, we really looked at the different moisture contents. We started when our clay was wet. As we continued to work, it became what's called leather hard. And now, as I'm pretty much finished adding parts onto my clay, it's bone dry. So all of that visible moisture is gone, and it's shrunk just a tiny bit. You may not notice it right now, but you'll notice it later on. Now we have canvas in the studio, and so if I gently rub the feet of my pot on that canvas, gently though, not as hard as I can, that's going to help to level my pottery out so that it sits even. Now, if you're at home and you happen to have a little bit of sandpaper, that would be a really great thing that could help you so that your feet are level. Or you could use a little bit of that green scratchy pad, the Scotch-Brite pad that you could get maybe, from the Dollar General, Walmart, Hy-Vee, any grocery store you go to, even probably the Dollar Tree. I don't want anyone to have to feel like they have to go out and buy supplies, but if you want those, I just don't have a lot right now. They've been back ordered. Otherwise, I would have put those into your kit. Okay. So now that I feel pretty good about how things look with the crumbs using that Sgraffito tool, so the one with the hook, and you can use the speared side too. I just mainly used the hook side. Now I can really gently sand it. And this is going to finish smoothing anything out. This is a nice step, but you also have to kind of trust yourself a little bit. Like, you don't want to sand too hard so that you just completely squish your pot and break it apart in your hand. If that were to happen, I don't know if I can repair it, especially if you're an online only student, so you might have to restart. But I have some rough stuff on the inside, and so I'm just doing a little gentle sanding. I'm not sanding super hard. And again, a little bit of sandpaper would work too if it didn't have a real strong grit. The grittier the sandpaper, the more scratchy marks you get, so it kind of defeats the purpose of smoothing. So then on the outside, I can also do some sanding as well and finish rounding out those lips of my pottery. Now, if I did a really, really good job smoothing prior to the pots becoming bone dry, I probably don't really need to do this step. So this is kind of for those people who maybe didn't get them as cleaned up as they would have liked, and now it's too late to really do anything else except for some gentle light sanding. Okay. So now I have all this dust everywhere, and so that's where I'm going to take my sponge, and I'm just going to dip it into a bowl of water and squeeze the excess out. And then I'm just going to wipe away some of that dust. Now, I could have gently tapped it to get some of the dust off before I started sponging. That would have worked fine. But the sponge is just going to help me remove that dust. This is also a really good time to double check that you have your name or your initials or something to identify your piece of pottery. When they come out of the kiln, they're all going to be white in color, and so you want to make sure that you can recognize yours. So I'm going to put an A and and a W, sorry, on the feet, so that I can remember that that's mine for my example piece. So I put my initials on that. And then I can move on to the next pinch pot. So this one, I have my initials on, but my inside foot isn't really all that even, and so that's where I could use that Sgraffito tool again. And I'm using the hooked part, but I could flip it around and use the spear, and that might help me get the foot ring to be more even. So if I wasn't really thinking about that when I was making it, I have an opportunity to do it now. You just have to be so careful that you don't squeeze your pottery too hard and that you're gentle with it. Otherwise, you can damage your piece of art and then you're not going to end up with a pot, and then we'll have to get you some more clay if you're an online student. If you're in the studio, we'll have to restart because I do want you to have those 3 pinch pots. We're kind of heading towards the end of the actual creation of our pinch pots, and then we'll start the firing process. And that's where I'm going to put them into the kiln so that they can get hard and be glazed. And most importantly, they're going to have a chemical reaction that does actually remove all the water from the piece. So now I'm a lot happier with the roundness, but I definitely can see some tool marks in there. So I want to take my green scratchy pad and do a little bit of smoothing. And I can do the same thing to the outside. Okay, we have to be gentle though. So it's going to take you a minute to figure out, like, okay, am I doing this too hard? Am I doing this too soft? Nothing's happening. But it's better to start slow and too soft so that you don't have any damage. So I've got some fingerprints that were left on here from the other day from when it was starting to dry out. And so this is just some final smoothing to make sure everything is pretty even. No major problems with it. And then I can also do the same thing with my top lip, do some final sanding. And I'm doing this pretty quickly, so if you are doing it, I would want you to take your time. Then again, I'm going to wipe that dust away. This also gets rid of any maybe final things that might be sticking off the surface, or lets you see that, oh, I missed that spot. There's a little area in here where it's sticking up. So now I can take my tool, kind of get that, and then I can wipe the dust away. If you get little teeny tiny scratchy marks from the Sgraffito tool or from the green scratchy pad, those will cover with glaze. But if you have really deep gouges, those are going to show up in the glaze. And I just want to be careful as I'm doing this because I want to hold it so I don't drop it, but at the same time I don't want to squeeze it too tight and break it into pieces. So now I have my semicircular guy, and this is the one that I changed into something else, which is just like a little face. So honestly, I did not do a very good job of smoothing the back. You can see there's still lumps and that there's still some ridges and things there. So this time I'm going to use the spear side, and I'm still kind of pulling out those lumps. This would have been a lot easier had I spent more time with the clay when it was wet or leather hard. So now I'm doing this, and it's a little bit more dangerous in the sense that I could literally break my project at any second. But I'm trying to scrape away some of that unevenness as carefully as I can so I don't break off the parts I attached. Now, depending upon what you made for your turn it into something else, sanding it may be a terrible idea. If you have very delicate little parts hanging off of it, you might just have to leave it as is and hope that the glaze can help smooth it out a little bit. But you don't want to break off your attached parts. So if I had put arms sticking out the side or something, I probably wouldn't want to do this step at that point because I wouldn't want to break those arms off. So I'm just going to kind of sand a little bit. And I'm holding it on the inside, but as far away from the eyes and the nose that I added as possible, so I can get that surface a little bit nicer looking. Okay, so the nose is a delicate place that I have attached. So I'm taking a risk by cleaning that area up. This would have been better to do when the clay was wet or leather hard. But I just want to show you it is possible. But if you're scared, then I would suggest you not. So I could do a little gentle sanding. Okay. And if worse comes to worse, you can just use a wet sponge. If you're like totally afraid to do this, and I understand that, just use a wet sponge. It won't make lumps and bumps go away, but it might help finish smoothing out that surface. try to go inside. I'll be real careful so I don't break off my nose. Hopefully I did a good job of scoring the slipping, which is the process we use to attach those parts. Otherwise, I'll find out real quick if things just fall off. So the pinch pots help show us how to attach parts, how you can add textures, and how you can create a foot. A foot will come back to us at different times in the course of the quarter, and so will the idea of textures and carving and adding parts. So now I have my 3 pinch pots, one with a foot, one that has texture and or carving, and one that has added parts that turned it into something else. Now, again, you can make adjustments to yours. You don't have to do your semicircular one with the attached parts that turned it into something else. You could do that with your shallow one, or you can mix it up and have your semicircular one, stay semicircular and put the foot on this one, and then maybe flip this one upside down. See how I just dropped that? I am so lucky that it wasn't any harder. Otherwise, what would happen is I would have chipped an edge, and I can't guarantee I could fix it. I might be able to sand it out. So see, you just got to be super careful. And now these pinch pots are bone dry. They still feel a little cool to the touch, and so that tells me that there's some moisture inside of the clay yet. It's not 100% evaporated, and so they'll need to sit in the kiln room to finish drying until I'm ready to do the first firing. The first firing is called a bisque fire again, and that's what makes our clay hard. That's what chemically changes the clay by removing all of the chemical water. And then it also gets them ready for glazing, like I was saying earlier. So at this point, I would just double check. Oh, when I sanded, can't really see my initials, so I'm going to move them, put them in a different spot so that I can see them. This one's got my initials. This one doesn't. So I need to make sure that I put my initials in. Now, if you're in the studio, you will be ready to just put them into the kiln room, and I can show you where that will go. If you are someone who is an online-only student, when you finish your pinch pots, we will make arrangements for you to drop them off and have them fired. There'll be one more video with pinch pots before we get into the glossy glazing process, but we're going to use 2 types of glazes, and one of those types of glazes is called an underglaze. So you'll have to keep one pinch pot unfired to glaze. So I would recommend maybe not the one you attached a lot of parts to, so I would maybe take my deep one or my shallow one, okay? So that kind of gives you how to wrap up construction once things are bone dry, and then from there they need to be fired.